Hello, Typographics. Hello, Mom and Dad. They're here, actually. My cousin, I think, is also here, Dorcas. I don't know what's more nerve-wracking, the laser focus of the typographic profession or the keen editorial eye of my dad. I love you. Natasha, that was an amazing talk. I actually had a few slides of your work in my earlier version of this presentation, but took them out. I think that was wise. So, as Sasha mentioned, I just moved back to Los Angeles 11 months ago. Other than the film and television industry, there are two topics most discussed in LA: the weather and traffic. Typical small talk. For as many cars as there are in LA, I hear about more accidents than I actually see them. But when I do see a car accident, the old cliche is true. You can't look, and you can't look away. The same can be said for the typographic specimens that represent the subject of this lecture, what I call abject typography. Abject typography encompasses the horrors of recent typographic innovations that are linked to dark turns in culture, the aberrant, the and unfortunate, all describe types of the lowliest kind. Abject typography ranges from the unintended, hideous, to the intentionally unattractive. This idea has been brewing for a while in a different form. Right around when I left grad school, I was noticing this thing at the time I was calling hipster typography, circa 2008 to 2010, 2011. But I didn't write anything. For students, academics, or those interested in criticism or being part of a conversation you want to be additive to, don't do that. I don't recommend it, but in this case, it's morphed into something else. This hipster typography was typified by the works of studios like Metahaven and Experimental Jet Set, among many others. This is a sample from Metahaven's manifesto, White Night Before a Manifesto. Then Mr. Keaty, my former professor at Cal Arts in 2013, wrote this thing called the global style, which captured some of the things I was thinking about in terms of uniformity of typography, but the hipster typography idea was more about type done intentionally wrong. In his essay, he's basically saying that the corporate Swiss the shed out of type was replaced by a new master, one driven by global art biennials and other cultural production, and the interconnected way in which graphic design moves around the world through portfolio sites, Instagram, and Tumblr primarily. In his quote here, he says, "The global style radiates newness and very little else. Like the international style before it, the global style is easy to assimilate and is obedient to the point of near transparency. On an emotional level, it sublimates quotidian boredom into a contemporary expression of cool, ironic ennui." And that sublimates word is key. It's that psychological action of hiding our true feeling and sensations under unconscious experiences in typography that I was really interested in. So he also made some visual examples to pair with his writing, and he's basically showing all this kind of type that's type in four corners, underline all caps, all tropes of our digital age, and sort of this filter of the never-ending product of modernism. And he used this trend list generator app to generate these, so sort of very sardonic and funny. I highly recommend that you read it. And so abject typography is the opposite of that. It's as if the global style has imploded. And I was also, more recently, thinking about some of my undergraduate students at Otis. And they've been doing this yet another wave of typography that is, for lack of a better term, like 90s-ish. similar to this piece by a Helsinki designer. Almost another version of postmodern things, type that's fractured, scanned, distorted. A lot of this seemed to be in relationship to the way the world feels now, the way that we communicate with constant flicking back and forth between digital and in-person communication, our attention over here, over there, terrorist rampages one moment, pop stars fighting the next, or the disturbing weird collapse of a terrorist attack at an Adriana Grande concert. And so I started to try to combine these sensibilities and get at why are designers making typography that looks like this? Because they didn't come of design age reading about emigre. They're not directly familiar with the intense history of discussions about ugly typography, like Stephen Heller's Cult of the Ugly, or counter-responses in Keating's zombie modernism. And they didn't directly experience the earlier aughts default response in the form of publications like ... But this feeling of abject typography persists, born out of the shadows of our half-forgotten and half-remembered aesthetic histories. These merging of trends don't just happen in a bubble of our typographic discourse. In our age of memes, where even potentially our sleep data is being mined by corporate algorithms, where our typing patterns are set to autocorrect and jammed with emoji, where we write and typeset our lives, all humans who have daily access to the internet, we're all typographers. Even if we're not trained as typographers, the constant contact with interfaces pretty much force us to do this. The margins between you and I are vanished down to a mere pixel or two. We're living in a 24-hour global run-on sentence, one that's poorly spaced, or not at all. Night is day is night, good is bad, writing is wrong. We are being typography gaslit. I was sharing this idea with my roommate in LA, Carolyn, who is a painter who paints only in a digital space using Photoshop. She mentioned that I might want to take a look at the work of Julia Kristeva. Her book, Powers of Horror, talks about this idea of an essay in abjection. She's a psychoanalytic critic, theorist, philosopher. And I wasn't super familiar with the theory, but it really resonated with this idea that I was grappling with. And of course, when you start to dive into theory, shit gets weird. I couldn't stop taking screen grabs of the phenomena of the range of this insidious type. Speaking of shit, the abject starts with this description of a response of things that, gross us out, that are usually bodily related. Thank you, Ellen, for letting us know when we can urinate. And that's kind of how I feel about abject typography. It feels like a traffic accident that I talked about, that typographic pileup, a linguistic corpse with bent and distorted limbs, stems, and serifs lopped off. Again, I can't look and I can't look away. There's this one passage in Kristeva where she talks about a breaking apart of the distinction between the self and the other. She says that there's a traumatic fuzziness, I'm paraphrasing here, which the abject generates from a zone of unhabitability, which systematically, what she says, within groups and organizations like a country, pushes out those who are considered outside the norm of the social order. She says, if we have no jettisoned objects, and I say, and we don't in our endless digital archive of the web, how can we have a place where meaning collapses? She has this quote about this, we have this desire, oh, it's not showing up. It's okay. We have this desire for meaning, and this idea that in this digital space, where we have this kind of endless archive, no meaning's lost, no history's deleted, no graphic artifact gone, so we don't really have real ephemera. We can kind of always find any piece of design. It's not just like a poster that gets ripped down and put into a trash bin. And so this idea of like things being cast off, that's what the abject means, but then stuck in this constant history is really interesting to me. And there's kind of this history that's being erased by the current, and we're kind of lost in the slipstream of like emoji and just overlapping messages. I didn't really want to like call out specific case studies. I was a little hesitant about that, mostly because our current culture of like and the opposing force of F the haters has knocked the critical wind out of so many disciplines like graphic design. Sasha was illuminating to that. But I do think there are concrete examples that could be helpful. So take, for example, the work of Richard Turley. He's most known for his brilliant work as the design director of Bloomberg Business Week, and then he had this really amazing stint at MTV, and he created this kind of airtime called No Chill, which was a block of television that was meant to take on the characteristics of social media. So it was just like bombarding you with text and image constantly. And the way that they were exploring things felt very abject-y to me. It was hard to look at, it was intense. It was using the visual language of the digital internet vernacular, like kind of meme-y stuff, but it was aestheticized and sort of fetishized. I thought it was weird and cool, but sort of troubling, and this like kind of recycled style cycle issue. And so as I was looking at these things, I'm like, is this bad on purpose, or was it just not cross-tested for my browser? Like, let's do a pop quiz. Like, let's look at a couple things, like, is this bad on purpose? Or was this not cross-tested for my browser? To me, I was looking at this and I felt like this is the language of the template turned inside out. This is the language of the chaos in the machine. Expert and skilled typographers find ways to fetishize and aestheticize these typographic mishaps gone awry. They hunt and peck and gather from the typographic scrap heap and the dung pile of fallen corporate identity. These are intentionally bad, by the way. What about this? Is it bad on purpose? Or is it just not cross-tested for my browser? Bad on purpose? Or not cross-tested for my browser? So I went back to Kristeva and was just trying to figure out a way that maybe there could be some hope in this or some kind of resolution. And so I'll leave you with this quote where she's talking about this idea of the abject as being this thing that is a shape that's ceaselessly straying. We're no longer within the sphere of the unconscious, but we're at the limit of primal representation, and there's nevertheless this like intrinsically corporeal, already signifying, ooh, this is looking even cooler up here than it is looking down here. Wow, the abject. But she's just talking about repugnance, disgust, abjection, and it's just this this falling away of between I and the other. And I was just trying to like, how do I encapsulate this into like a shorthand English that people are like, when I bump into them and they're like, what are you going to be talking about at Typographics? And I'm like, ooh, well, it's this thing about ugly typography, and it's like so good, it's bad. And luckily, right as the conference was approaching, our president gave me the perfect shorthand for abject typography. Kofefi. That's it, abject typography. Thank you very much.